Everyone. I am back for another episode, and I've been wanting to do this one for a while. I've released content before and have a lot more like in-depth type of resources on breastfeeding nutrition for athletes. But I wanted to do a podcast episode just to kind of put this resource out there in a more like accessible way, and kind of to give you some insight on just like the basics, the foundation. And if you're wanting to learn more and applying it and more some like more visual tools, obviously, I'll let you know where to find those things too. So today we're going to definitely talk about breastfeeding nutrition for athletes. And a lot of this, and I'm still getting over a cold, so I'm sorry if I cough or have to clear my throat. It's just the cold that won't quit. And I'm not really sick. Like I feel pretty good overall and have felt pretty good most of the time, but just it's like the phlegm just won't quit. And it probably won't until we're definitely out of, public school one day in like a decade or two. So but anyway, we're going to talk about breastfeeding nutrition. And this definitely applies if you're, maybe not a runner. Um, but we are going to make it, of course, running specific and share some things that, runners specifically should be more aware of. And I'm excited to make this resource because I feel like a lot of this stuff just doesn't really exist when you are in the position of trying to breastfeed your child and start training and whatnot. Again, it's very vulnerable. You just want to be doing things right. Like you're kind of just trying to survive. It's a high stress like time in your life usually because you're doing a lot. You're spread thin and you just want answers. So that's what I'm going to attempt to give you today. So let's just get started. When we talk about breastfeeding, obviously, for most people, if they're going to breastfeed, it starts very soon after you give birth. It's something that, starts right away. And I know for a lot of people, myself included, you don't necessarily think about that a ton when you're pregnant, but you should be because there's a lot of things that are going to affect how breastfeeding may go for you. And some of those things we can do, like we can set ourselves up for success, like when we're trying to conceive and when we're getting pregnant. Like there is a lot of cascade effect from pregnancy and fertility before pregnancy that is going to affect how we feel postpartum, our milk supply, and also our return to training, how these experiences go for us in general. Is it everything? Of course not. There's so many, so many uncontrollable factors about trying to conceive pregnancy, fertility, postpartum, breastfeeding. Of course, I'm here to focus on the nutrition, which is a controllable factor. So, trying to conceive comes first, then pregnancy, then birth, then breastfeeding. Pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding, especially like immediately postpartum, it's like doing a marathon to warm up for an ultra marathon to warm up for an Ironman, and you get no breaks in between. And I don't say that to scare you, but to really help you understand like how metabolically taxing these things are on your body. So if we can at least start the marathon, like the first part, pregnancy, well fueled, decent blood work, good micronutrient statuses, you know, eating well, recovering well from our exercise, modifying that as needed, listening to pain signals and modifying our training as needed. This can really help, you at least get started on the right foot. Because again, there are a lot of uncontrollable factors of this, and you don't get a break between pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding. It's like boom, 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 right? When I I tell this story often to new moms who have been through it, like when I remember like I had Owen, and you can listen to my birth story podcast if you want to. That's documented back in like January of 2024. But you have a baby, you're just like, oh my gosh, golden hour. For my hospital it was like 2 hours. You're just like, I can't believe this is my baby. I get to meet you. I'm so excited. I'm so tired. Like maybe people have different experiences than that, but that's how mine was. And then I remember when the nurses came in at one point, I had Owen like in the middle of the night, so they came in at some point the next day, and I remember them just being like, okay, now you start breastfeeding every 2 hours, and the clock starts when you start breastfeeding. So it's really every 90 minutes. If you know, you know. And I remember it reminded me from like the scene from Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban where Harry finally like gets Buckbeak to bow to him. He's petting his beak and he's like, awesome, like this thing's not gonna kill me. Like I, have come so far. And then Hagrid's like, okay, I think he'll let you ride him now. And Harry's like, what? That's how it felt. They're like, okay, so now you feed this thing every 2 hours forever, like for the foreseeable future. You. And I was like, what? um just kind of pulled me right out of that like postpartum bliss. It was still blissful, but there's a lot of stuff that comes with learning how to breastfeed for the first time. So, um, there's no breaks between pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding. I promise I'm going to make a point soon. So, when it comes to setting yourself up for success, we want to nutrition well through all of these phases. And I do have a whole course on pregnancy nutrition for athletes, and I will link that in the show notes if that's something you want to check out. I'm not really going to cover that today, but just knowing that, how well fueled you are, what your blood work looks like before and during pregnancy can absolutely impact how you feel postpartum and what your milk supply is like. If we've got a lot of like vitamin D deficiencies, anemia, low B12, you know, before and during pregnancy, and pregnancy can exacerbate a lot of these things because it's a very depleting process. You're literally growing a human, and that human's going to take everything from you. Um, yeah, you're gonna have probably a tough time with that postpartum. But if you can know that, hey, blood work looks good, or at least I'm working on things during pregnancy and postpartum, that's probably going to set you up to at least have a more full cup in a situation where you're really tired and have a lot on your plate. And what I want to make you aware of is that the healthcare system in the US does not does not check these things. You have to ask. They're gonna do blood work when you get pregnant, but it's really to check pregnancy related hormones, maybe blood sugar. And maybe like a complete blood count just to get an idea of what hemoglobin is like. Um, and they're not going to check things like that I talk about in a more recent podcast episode about labs you should get done as a runner. Same things apply for pregnancy and postpartum. I also think these labs are generally a pretty good idea, especially the micronutrient labs. So if you want to know what those are, go listen to that episode. It's just a couple back. But we want to be, we want to be checking things for like nutrient deficiencies, anemia, and when we go through birth too, or pregnancy, because a lot can happen during pregnancy, know that trauma, medication, medical history, medical interventions during all of these processes, of course, can also affect milk supply. There's some research saying some things are going to affect it more than others, but for the most part, a lot of women who want to breastfeed, if they're supported and educated and know how, they're going to be able to breastfeed. Not everyone, okay? Not everyone. I totally get that. I am a formula baby myself, but for medical reasons. So not everyone, but the majority are going to be able to, even if there are like some interventions or things don't go perfectly, okay? So just knowing that genetics, trauma, medications, medical interventions, existing medical history, anemia, nutrient deficiencies, all of this can set you up for having, a certain experience when it comes to breastfeeding postpartum. So we really do want to be thinking about setting ourselves up for success if you are planning on breastfeeding or want to breastfeed early. I think having a mindset of, if you're someone who wants to breastfeed, this was my mindset personally, of being like, I really want to do it. I am, going to educate myself and get the stuff and get the circle and support system and the resources, acting like this is my option. This is how I'm going to feed my baby. This is what I'm going to do. I think that's really helpful and important. I don't think just being like, I'm just going to wing it and see what happens, because I know there's some argument on the internet, like it's a natural process. You should just like know how to do it. That's BS for a lot of people, let me tell you. Some people feel intuitive about it and natural. I had some experiences like that, but you've never done this before, honey. Like you don't know. Like, it's good to get some education on it. And this is part of that education. So understanding what to look for, how to feel yourself is super important. And doing that before you're breastfeeding is important. If you're already breastfeeding, great. You're still getting resources right now. So I'm proud of you. Um, know that any amount of breastfeeding is good for your baby. Like if you're someone who was able to do like colostrum, in the hospital, or that you collected during pregnancy and you weren't able to breastfeed past that, that's incredible. That's awesome. If you breastfeed for, years, awesome, incredible, great. Fed is best at the end of the day. So I want to say that too. There's a lot of shame and stigma that comes with choosing not to breastfeed or having that choice taken from you because you physically can't for whatever reason. I have friends who have been in that situation. It sucks. When that was your plan and something you wanted to experience and do, and you're not able to. That totally sucks. So any amount of feeding your baby in any way is great. So just to kind of talk about this in my breastfeeding for athletes masterclass, but I want to talk about it here too. When we are pregnant, our sex hormones are high. Estrogen's high, progesterone's high, other hormones are high. Once we are postpartum, especially if you choose to breastfeed, those sex hormones come crashing down off a cliff. It's actually the most like dramatic hormone change a woman could go through or any human could go through naturally in their life. Um, like because it is such a quick process. And there are going to be symptoms that come with that. Night sweats, that one definitely surprised me. I was not prepared for that. So night sweats, mood changes, feeling sad, like the baby blues. I definitely felt that. Feeling exhausted, feeling really emotional. Like it's explanatory, like self-explanatory that you'd feel some of these things because you literally just had a human and your world changed and you are not sleeping very well and all of these things. But physically, hormone wise, yeah, really dramatic change. So sex hormones drop and bottom out. And what happened, like they bottom out and drop even further than like before you were pregnant, which is why a lot of women don't get like a period back for a little while postpartum, even if they're not breastfeeding. And then what happens is the hormones prolactin and oxytocin increase, and these hormones support milk production. So sex hormones and prolactin are typically opposing each other. So when one of them is elevated, the other one is decreased. There's a little bit of nuance to this the further and further you get into your breastfeeding journey and postpartum, but especially initially, dramatic decrease in the sex hormones, dramatic increase in prolactin. And that's what causes that milk supply to show up a couple days after birth, usually. Typically, colostrum, which is liquid gold. That's what it's kind of known as. It's like a very, very nutrient dense and concentrated, sticky, like yellow stuff milk that comes out of your boobs when you're first breastfeeding. It's a very small volume, but like big bang for your buck when it comes to nutrient benefits for your baby. And then typically a couple days later, your like actual milk comes in. And that's because prolactin has dramatically increased. So I think that's helpful because all the nutrition stuff we talk about for breastfeeding is keeping this in mind. Like we're trying to support hormone production, we're trying to support rest and digest mode because oxytocin, it's hard for that to be produced when we're in fight or flight mode all the time or when we're in a chronically stressed state, which like is really hard when you're a new parent because you are in a stress state very often. So all the nutrition interventions we're going to talk about is about supporting you, nourishing your body, supporting these hormone productions. So I think it's just helpful to understand what's going on physiologically. This process is extremely, extremely metabolically taxing. So, especially when we're considering milk production, birth healing, no matter how the baby came out, we're healing from pregnancy too. We're not sleeping. A lot of women too don't sleep well during pregnancy either. And then you're not sleeping well postpartum. And this is very metabolically taxing on the body. It's actually more metabolically taxing than pregnancy even was because of the context of milk production, but also recovering from pregnancy and birth. Like I said, it's a marathon to warm up for an ultra marathon to warm up for an Ironman. Like it's very long. It's a long process. And it accumulates a lot of fatigue and stress. And if you have some nutrient stuff or some medical stuff going on already, like this doesn't help you, you're not doomed. But like, of course, if we can control some of those controllable factors before you even give birth, very helpful. Even if you don't breastfeed for a long time, if your milk comes in at all, and you're like, I breastfed for like a couple weeks or I breastfed for a couple months, even if your milk comes in at all, very metabolically taxing just to like make that milk, and for your hormones to shift in order for that to happen. Your energy needs are going to be increased, and then we are still recovering from pregnancy and birth during that time. And of course, one of, I think, the hardest parts about this, especially in the US, is there's not much anything. There's not much any type of regulation around parental leave. So a lot of the times too, people are kind of expected just to like wrap everything up in 6 weeks and pretend like nothing happened and everything's good and nothing changed. And that's literally insane. Because learning how to feel yourself postpartum like takes a long time. And the recovery process is longer than 6 weeks. Um, and learning how to breastfeed your baby takes longer than 6 weeks, especially because they change all the time. And it's actually insane that we have this expectation on women, and men too, like, who are partners, any type of partner. It's really crazy that we have this expectation, especially in the US, that like you just kind of gotta pretend like nothing happened, show no signs of weakness, wrap it up, and get back in the office. That's insane. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. I do think we would have very, very different expectations on ourselves as a society if literally everyone, like in the world, like if the expectation was you get a baby, you get a year to figure that out postpartum before you have to come back to work. If that was the norm and that's what everyone was doing, I feel like our expectations of timeline and what we're expected to do and how we approach things would be so different. But I digress. So we know too, with the no sleep thing, that less than 7 hours of sleep per night is linked with an increase in injury by about 1.7 times. So it almost doubles your increased risk of injury if you're getting less than 7 hours of sleep. And we know that postpartum, you're probably not getting 7 hours of sleep, definitely unbroken sleep, right? So this does increase our risk of injury. It's not that like you have to strive for 7 hours of sleep and being perfect all the time to prevent injury, because that's not realistic. I want you to be able to be active before you're getting that much sleep, within reason, modify if you need to. But we do also need to understand that we can't just like out hack that. Like that is still scientifically accurate. We are not going to recover as well when we're not sleeping. And when there's breastfeeding on top of that, it's also extra metabolic tax on the body. So one of the reasons why I'm painting the picture this way is to kind of draw light on why, when I talk about in a few seconds, bone stress injuries, injury risk in general, thyroid issues, nutrient deficiencies, bone density issues, when I talk about these things, you kind of get how that's the case. Because any one of these factors would increase those things, but it's like we've got pregnancy, we've got postpartum, we've got birth, we've got maybe some trauma if we had that, we've got no sleep, and we've got breast milk production. Like huge metabolic tax on the body. So if you're also like, yeah, I'm just going to go out for like a 3 or 4 mile run because I'm feeling pretty good at, 5 or 6 weeks postpartum, that might not go super well for you over time because it's literally the perfect storm for your body to get injured and suffer a bit. Okay. So let's go over the main things that affect milk supply in general. Because there's just gotta turn my space heater off. It's so cold here now, but now I'm like sweating because I have a space heater on. Um, let's go over the main things that affect milk supply, because I think there's a lot of like, there's a whole breastfeeding like culture on the internet. Like if I remember scrolling TikTok at 2 in the morning, feeding my baby and just feeling like I was being bombarded with different accounts who some of them were super helpful. And some of them I was like, wow, she pumped and got like 12 ounces of milk and I'm getting three. Like, what the heck? It's very easy to fall into a comparison trap when you're breastfeeding. It's very easy to fall for products and services that people are trying to sell you, and they are chipping away at your pain points and your insecurities when you're breastfeeding. And it's a little messed up. So I think to clear the air, here there are the main things that affect your milk supply. These are the things you have to worry about. These are the things that are or are not within your control. Genetics, not in your control. Nutritional adequacy, usually in your control. Hydration, usually within your control. Milk removal from the breast and breast stimulation. So pumping or feeding your baby, or, manually releasing milk frequently. That's the biggest thing that affects milk supply, because breastfeeding is a supply and demand situation. And medical history. Okay. Those are the things. Things that don't affect supply. Exercise does not affect milk supply. Lots of research backing this one up. It's a really common misnomer that when people start exercising again or going back to work, that their milk supply may be affected. A lot of the times, though, it's not the exercise or it's not the going back to work. It's the extra stress on the body and the lack of increasing nutrition and sleep to recover from it. If we're able to increase nutrition and sleep to recover from these things, if we're staying hydrated, won't affect milk supply. If we're not, yeah, it might affect milk supply, but it's not really the exercise itself. It's not saying, oh, if I go exercise and I'm still doing really well with fueling and hydrating and sleeping, that it'll also still be affected. No. If you're accounting for the controllables, exercise does not affect milk supply. Stress can affect milk supply. How many galactagogues you use, that's not going to affect milk supply. So galactagogues are like milk boosters. This is huge on the internet. There are some that have some research behind them, basically saying it won't hurt. Maybe it helps. There's some that say flat out, no, this doesn't do anything for your milk supply. I talk about this in my Breastfeeding for Athletes course. So if you want to look more into individual galactagogues, you can, but know that if your milk supply is suffering, putting your money, time, effort, and energy into buying like the milk supplements, the brewer's yeast powders, like those types of like that's not where we should be spending our energy and time and money. Okay. We should be spending it on nutritional adequacy. Are you eating enough? Hydration, and also milk removal, and lowering stress if you can. So definitely want to put that out there. So in terms of how much extra energy we need in a day to breastfeed, all over the map. Very metabolically taxing though. So it's estimated that between like 300 and 1,000 calories extra on top of what you already need per day is what's needed for milk supply, breastfeeding. This is going to vary depending on the person. It's going to vary depending on like where you're at in your breastfeeding journey. Typically earlier on, more energy is needed because you're recovering from birth, like your body's trying to like get itself off the ground when it comes to starting to produce milk for the first time. Milk's the only thing your baby's having, and it's very nutrient dense. So this is something that is going to wax and wane a little bit over time, but yeah, it's a big range and a big amount. Like that's not nothing on top of what you also need just for basal metabolic rate, to digest food, to make your bodily functions work properly, for any exercise, for any just regular activity around the house, for healing from birth. I can't remember if I said that already. Like all of those things also require energy. So a lot of the times for most breastfeeding athletes, like we need quite a bit. If I've got someone who's like 6 months postpartum and they're trying to kind of like run 30 miles a week again, they're trying to kind of do their typical like workout schedule, that type of thing, and they're breastfeeding. And they're a little bit further removed from the recovering from birth part, like acutely, like they're not bleeding anymore. Like maybe they still have some pelvic floor stuff going on, but they're feeling pretty good overall. Like that athlete needs at least 3,000 calories a day. Like that's kind of my minimum for a lot of those types of clients, if you want to put a number on it. So, oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, things that don't affect milk supply, is boob size. I don't think I mentioned that. Big misunderstanding, misinformation is that the bigger your boobs, the more milk they can make. No, not true. Not true. So we're just going to dispel that one too. Your boobs will change in size when you're breastfeeding and when you stop, but the size itself does not affect milk supply. So when it comes to energy needs, talking about that, one reason why breastfeeding athletes in general can be susceptible to a decrease in bone density, a decrease in nutrient depletion, and therefore like low energy availability or even relative energy deficiency and sport syndrome, is because your breastfeeding nutrition related needs are really high. And basically if you're not getting enough to compensate for that out of your diet, like your body's just going to use its vitamin D and calcium and phosphorus and everything from your bones to compensate. Which is one reason why, if you're also then running a lot on top of that, so very high impact activity for the bones, yeah, if they're already a bit, they're kind of getting a bit depleted because you're not, eating enough to fuel the milk supply, you're going to take a hit there. Same thing with pregnancy. Like the baby's pretty well isolated in there. Like if they're not getting what they need, your body's going to prioritize giving it to them from itself, which is why muscle loss is really common in pregnancy and postpartum. Like breastfeeding butt, where women talk about they feel like their butt went away when they started breastfeeding, is really common postpartum. A lot of muscle tissue on the butt. Body's going to take that and use it if you're not eating enough protein to make up for what's lost in breastfeeding and also for your own needs. So if you're adding a lot of activity on top of things, know that your body's going to just give itself away to continue making milk before it starts being like, I got to like dry up the supply. So if your bones get depleted, bone density goes down. Yeah, it's going to increase risk of stress fractures. So one of the questions that someone asked me on Instagram was, if I'm eating enough, does bone density still go down when I'm breastfeeding? And this isn't super clear in the research, but the answer is basically probably not. Like you might see a little bit of a bone density decrease because of the lack of estrogen, because prolactin is increased when breastfeeding and estrogen is decreased. So depending on how long you breastfeed for, you may see a little bit of a hit on your bone density because your sex hormones are lower and estrogen is really important for laying down new bone. But if you're kind of making up for that by eating enough, getting enough vitamin D, checking your blood levels and making sure they're above 50, eating enough calcium, eating enough magnesium, bone rich mineral or bone supporting minerals, eating enough food in general, that should at least really help that bone density discrepancy not be as big. So hopefully that makes sense. Another thing that's really interesting is there's a lot of factors that are going to influence when your cycle comes back postpartum. It's a really common misconception that breastfeeding is like birth control, and because it decreases your sex hormones and you're not getting a period, maybe like you don't need to use birth control. No, not true. Not true. I know people who've made that mistake and gotten pregnant. So, the thing is you can get a period when you're breastfeeding, but you're going to ovulate before you get the period, and that's when you're going to get pregnant if you have intercourse, right? So we want to consider that breastfeeding, not a good form of birth control, because we won't know we're fertile until it's too late, essentially. So when it comes to getting your cycle back, stress, how the baby came out, genetics, if you're eating enough, if you're breastfeeding or not, um, if you choose to take birth control or not postpartum, like hormonal birth control, all of those things are going to affect whether or not your cycle comes back. However, something called like breastfeeding amenorrhea is something that's normal to a degree where again our sex hormones are decreased because we're breastfeeding, and that basically makes no tissue grow in our uterus, no egg gets released, we don't get a period. um, that's normal to an extent. What I think happens, there's not a ton of research on this, but it's something that's becoming more well understood, is that more women should have probably gotten their cycle back earlier. And breastfeeding amenorrhea can quickly turn into hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is underfueling related, um, because there's a lot of lack of education and a perfect storm situation of women not eating enough when they're breastfeeding. So take me, for example. I breastfed my son for about 13 months. We had a pretty good experience overall. I had a, uncomplicated vaginal delivery with pretty much no interventions. So like that context I think is helpful because again, your birth story, a lot of stuff's going to affect your stress levels and how your body responds. So I think that context is important. I got my cycle back around 5 months postpartum. Even though I breastfed for like several more months after that, and I do think that was partially genetic related. I do think it was partially like lack of birth trauma related. Like I had a pretty smooth experience. I also think a lot of it had to do with I was so diligent about trying to eat enough and not exercising too much if I wasn't able to make the math work out on my food. I was very diligent about prioritizing sleep, even if that meant that I didn't always get great sleep because kids. I was still prioritizing it. I was able to have a maternity leave. That makes a huge difference in stress levels, in my opinion. That's probably just a fact. That's not even just my opinion. That's probably science. And then also, I did a really good job on checking my lab values, making sure things weren't depleted, and my cycle came back around 5 months. That's not going to be everyone's experience, but I think if you do get a period back while you're breastfeeding and it's regular, which mine was regular pretty much immediately, like that's something to celebrate because that's kind of like you're getting that vital sign back that you're going to be able to say, okay, am I eating enough? If my period's coming pretty regularly, to me, that's a good sign that I'm probably doing a decent job eating enough. Some people's cycles are going to be more resilient than others. Some are going to be a bit more sensitive than others. So I don't want you to feel like ashamed if your period doesn't come back while you're breastfeeding, because for some people it won't until they're all done. But I do think if you're in the situation where you're like, wow, they said if I was breastfeeding, I wouldn't get a period, and then I did. I think that's something to celebrate, and that's kind of annoying, but I think it's something to celebrate because it probably means, hey, I am doing a good job fueling my body because I'm fueling my body enough to make like prolactin and some sex hormones and to ovulate, and I'm starting to get a cycle back, and that's really important. So we talked a little bit about energy needs. Now I want to talk a little bit about like micronutrient needs and macronutrient needs. So, energy needs, like I said, increase in general from all of the macronutrients, carbs, protein, fat. But in particular, there is research showing that protein needs increase. And for athletes, I like to pay attention to this specifically because of muscle mass and body comp. Um, like I said, breastfeeding, but like, your muscle mass is going to decrease if you're not getting enough protein. And this can be really hard for some athletes. So I do think notably, trying to look at protein needs around, like 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram per day is helpful for athletes, with some needing more than that. How I kind of looked at it was, let me kind of calculate what I would normally eat in protein when I'm not pregnant, because protein needs are also higher when you're pregnant. And let me add like 20 to 40 grams to that throughout the day. And that's also going to equate to, more calories, which helps you meet the energy needs. And then the rest can come from carbs and fat. So protein needs increase, and that's to make milk. And also to preserve your own muscle mass, and can help you recover as well if you are starting to train. Protein's also going to help you recover from like birth, pregnancy, and be super important for tissue repair. So that's another thing that is why protein needs increase postpartum, whether or not you choose to breastfeed. But if you are breastfeeding, protein needs are higher for a longer period of time. Micronutrient wise, you're going to need more calcium, more magnesium, more potassium, more sodium, and more fluids. You're also going to need more vitamin D, more B vitamins, more iodine, choline, phosphorus, zinc, selenium, and um, we need more of the electrolytes and the fluids because that goes with that hydration piece. And again, I typically say if you're breastfeeding, you want at least 100 ounces of water per day, fluids. That can feel like a lot for some people. I will say when you're breastfeeding, sometimes you're like, well, I'm thirsty all the time. So that makes sense. It's not that hard for me to do it as long as I have stuff near me all the time. But a lot of people do forget about the electrolytes. So your electrolytes increase because they do get passed through as essential minerals in your milk supply to your baby. Um, and these are really, really helpful for milk supply too. Like a lot of the times on like breastfeeding TikTok, you're going to see women pounding like body armor, liquid IV, and they're like, the supplement is magic. It increases milk supply. It's the electrolytes in it. Okay. So if drinking electrolyte supplements like Element, liquid IV, those types of things helps you just get them in and drink more water, then do it. That's what I did. I definitely had like at least 2 elements a day when I was breastfeeding, especially when I started running again, because you're also losing those electrolytes in sweat, which is why this is even more important for athletes. And I was a big fan too of adding like coconut water and body armor to like smoothies, coconut milk to smoothies, just to increase potassium intake and just trying to get enough of that through food as well. I still am a really big dairy eater. So yogurt, milk, ice cream. One tip that I have to kind of practically increase calcium, intake is to have a cup of milk, whether it's dairy milk, almond milk, cashew milk, whatever milk you prefer, because a lot of them are calcium fortified or just rich in calcium naturally. Have a cup of that with your meals. It's going to help you get at least half your calcium needs in the day and make that a little bit easier. There's also magnesium, potassium, and sodium, and fluids and protein in milk. So it really is a power food for breastfeeding. If you think about it, it's basically what's coming out of your body, so makes sense to put it back in, right? Even if it's coming from a different animal. So definitely rich in those minerals and can be super helpful. Again, you can also do like a dairy alternative if you're not tolerating dairy, or if you have to, skip dairy because your baby's not tolerating you eating dairy, which can definitely happen. Um, Micronutrients. Vitamin D is a big one. So there's not like a you need to get this much a day that I can give you, because it's all over the map, especially for athletes who have higher vitamin D needs as well. And this has to do with immune function, bone function. And we really don't want vitamin D getting low in us, because it can mean, hey, maybe it's even low in our baby because they're not getting enough through the milk. And also, our body's just going to use whatever's left in our bones. And we don't want that. That's not great for bone density. So, or your immune function or your mental health. So, vitamin D, what I can say is getting it checked via blood work is helpful. And then you'll know if you're taking enough or not. So, above 50 is what you want in US measurements. I can't remember. I think it might be moles per milliliter. I can't remember, but above 50 in the US is what you're looking for. And if it's below that, you'll want to add a supplement and talk to registered dietitian about how much to add. And there's kind of two methods to make sure baby is getting enough vitamin D. A lot of babies in the Northeast or in the Northern Hemisphere in general also need vitamin D because of lack of sun, especially like my son was born in January in New Hampshire. And Lord knows there's not much sun exposure that I can give to him at that time of year, especially that requires his skin being bare to the sun. It's just not happening. So you can kind of do two things. You can supplement the baby directly. There's like liquid droppers of vitamin D, and you'll want to talk to a pediatrician or lactation consultant about dose and whatnot. But typically, the baby dose is, I think it's around 100 IUs or 50 IUs. And you can just give them a drop per day, either in a bottle or right on the nipple, or put it on your finger and then put, your finger in their mouth, whatever seems best to you. You could also put it into food like later on if they're older. So you can do it that way, supplement baby directly, and then check your own levels. Or you can check your own levels, and if they're above 50, you can add between 5 and 6,000 IU on top of your intake. This is a lot. So it's something where I recommend checking your levels, because having a good understanding of where you're at is going to be helpful before you add a lot more supplementation to the mix. Because maybe your levels are great and you add like 5,000 IU and they stay good, and that means like it's kind of netting out through the breast milk. Or maybe your levels are pretty low and adding that much isn't enough and you need more. This is personally what we did. I tried to supplement Owen like for the first couple months, and then I just kept forgetting. So I just made sure that when I was able to get blood work done around like 10 weeks postpartum, that my levels were good. And then I just started adding like about 5,000 IU on top of what I was already taking, and it kept my levels good. It wasn't too much for me personally, and I knew he was getting it that way as well. And now that I'm not breastfeeding anymore, I just resupplement for him. But you want to talk to your pediatrician about that, and what's best for a baby. Some of them may not be familiar with these recommendations because they are a little bit newer, but that's one reason why vitamin D intake is higher for breastfeeding women, is because you're giving it to baby and you don't want to deplete your bones. When you're an athlete, that's even more important. B vitamins, iodine, choline, phosphorus, zinc, selenium. These are important for your bone density as well, and also your mood and your thyroid health, especially like selenium, B vitamins, vitamin C. These things are really important for your thyroid health. Thyroid issues are pretty common postpartum. And for some women, it can be like pregnancy and postpartum and the stress and metabolic tax of that triggered like an autoimmune related thyroid condition they were already predisposed and at risk of getting because of genetics, family history, like Hashimoto's or Graves. And for some women, that even gets triggered in pregnancy. So sometimes doctors will check TSH during pregnancy, not always. And a lot of the times, the medical reference range for TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, is huge. And you're gonna notice symptoms and issues with the thyroid in much tighter range. So for a TSH, what I consider optimized and ideal, and that's based off of research, what I've seen in clients, is between 1 and 2. But the clinical reference range is much larger than that. And that's, in part because doctors aren't going to be able to prescribe medication for you until it's outside of the ranges. But we can be doing things to support the thyroid nutritionally and lifestyle wise, even if it's within the reference range, but you're having symptoms. So, getting your thyroid tested, and not just TSH. I recommend getting a full thyroid panel, and you can just Google what's included in that if you want to take that list to your doctor. But a full thyroid panel, including TSH, which TSH is not even made in the thyroid. Um, but we want to get those things checked during pregnancy, but also postpartum. Because what happens too is sometimes the stress and the metabolic tax of postpartum can just trigger thyroid changes that are not autoimmune related. And you'll know if it's autoimmune related or not if there's like antibodies present on the thyroid panel, which is why we want the full thyroid panel. Um, for a lot of people, what's really common is they will experience thyroid changes that are not autoimmune related, and it's related to nutrient deficiencies that we don't check in our typical healthcare system. So you got to ask for all of these. And it's related to like stress, not sleeping, like your world being turned upside down a little bit because having a baby is a lot of work. Growing the baby, having the baby, birthing the baby, feeding the baby, all a lot of work. So all of these nutrients are going to affect thyroid. And that's something that you want to check because if your thyroid is doing funky things, it's going to affect your body composition. It's going to affect your milk supply. It's going to affect hair loss more than normal postpartum hair loss. It's going to affect your mood, especially anxiety and depression. So we really do want to check on these things and make sure we're eating enough to support these vital organs working. Okay, iron. This is another one. So iron technically, like the technical RDA for iron during breastfeeding is higher than it was, or I'm sorry, lower than it was during pregnancy, but higher than um, pre-pregnancy. I don't use these reference ranges at all. What I prefer to do and what is clinically more appropriate to do with athletes is check your own blood work and go from there. So we want to check ferritin, total iron binding capacity, serum iron, and a complete blood count. And that's going to give you a good idea of your iron status. There's a lot of other things we can check that go into that I talk about in that lab episode that you can go back and listen to. Um, but one reason why I recommend this is because a lot of women become iron deficient or anemic during pregnancy, and it's brushed off as, oh, yeah, it's just because you're pregnant, and nothing's done about it. And this is BS. So, you want to check this during pregnancy if you can. Before pregnancy would be good too, because again, thinking backwards, if we're iron deficient and then we get pregnant and then we know pregnancy can make us more iron deficient and then we have to push a baby out or have a C-section, doesn't matter how the baby comes out, you're going to lose blood when it happens. That's going to cause more iron deficiency. And then breastfeeding also requires iron, like, whoo, right? um, so if we can go into pregnancy knowing that our iron status is in good standing, it's optimized for an athlete, ferritin above 40, if you're wondering. And then we know that we're checking it on pregnancy. So if there's any normal discrepancies, we can make sure we're kind of keeping it up with our food intake, with our, training modifications, eating enough carbohydrates, maybe an iron supplement. And then we still are going to lose blood postpartum. Most women are going to become iron deficient postpartum because you lose blood. You lose blood when the baby comes out. If it comes out vaginally, you lose blood if the baby comes out via C-section. Don't matter how, you're going to lose blood. Not to scare you, it's fine. But it's something that happens. And then you continue bleeding after postpartum, whether or not you had a C-section or a vaginal birth, because your uterus is shrinking back down and getting rid of what it doesn't need anymore. It's kind of like having a period for a long time. And that's blood loss. So most women are, even if you had great iron standing going into birth, you're going to become iron deficient in birth. So it's just the level of how iron deficient are you is going to depend on how you were before you gave birth. So we need to like replete this. And this is one reason why postpartum nutrition is so important. It can help you feel so much better so much sooner if you are focused on meals eating enough, letting people feed you, eating when the baby eats, eating around the clock, trying to get in convenient foods that you can eat with one hand because you're probably going to be holding a baby with the other hand, and trying to navigate this in an intentional way. And it's obviously more helpful if you have support. It's obviously more helpful if you have education. It's obviously more helpful if you have people making you meals and you have a maternity leave. Like, if you look at other cultures and how they feed women postpartum, they're being fed warm foods, healing foods, iron rich foods, and that is to, you know, make you feel better postpartum and get your health back. But in the US, we're like, go right back to work, pretend like nothing happened, and we're not even going to check if you're iron deficient. And if you are and we checked, we're still going to send you home with little education. That's the experience I've had with myself, but also most women that I've worked with. I think 100% of the postpartum women I've worked with who have been postpartum for like many months to a year were iron deficient and anemic when they left the hospital and didn't do anything about it. So, and it's not that they weren't told to do anything about it. It actually is that they weren't told to do anything about it and they just didn't know. So unfortunately, this is very normal and common in our healthcare system. So here I am to tell you, you're probably going to be iron deficient postpartum, and you're probably going to want to understand where your levels are at and assume that you're going to need a lot of iron rich foods and just a lot of food in general to replete. And you might need to stay on top of this more long term if you are going to be a breastfeeding athlete, because breastfeeding requires iron as well. And being a runner makes your iron needs higher because of energy needs, foot strike hemolysis, and a lot of other factors as well. Your iron status is also going to change whenever you do get a period back. So that's something to consider. So we talk a lot about increasing iron and how to do this in my pregnant athlete nutrition course and also in my breastfeeding athlete and postpartum fourth trimester course or class, which is included. That class is included in the pregnancy nutrition course, or you can just buy the postpartum breastfeeding class on its own. They're both linked in the show notes. Okay. So my tips on how to make all this happen, like all the energy needs increase, the protein, the micros, all that. Here are my tips. We want to include the Holyfield 4 at meals and snacks. Protein, carbohydrates, fat, and fiber. Those are the Holyfield 4. If you've got balanced meals and snacks every 2 to 4 hours throughout the day, you're golden. You're going to be doing great. And yes, that means overnight too. My second tip is when you're feeding the baby, you're eating and drinking too. Or someone's feeding you, right? Like if you can't do it yourself, because you're going to be feeding that baby every 2 hours at the maximum. I mean, the first couple of weeks postpartum, you're probably going to be feeding them more often than that because of cluster feeding. Look up what that is if you're a first time mom and you haven't had your baby yet. Cluster feeding is basically when the baby just is attached to you for several hours because they're going through a growth spurt and they're trying to get your milk supply to catch up with their growth spurt. So you could very well, I found myself in this position many a time. So you could be stuck in a chair or in your bed or wherever breastfeeding this child and them having like just like sucking the life out of you for like 3 hours. You got to make sure you have snacks close by or you've got someone feeding you because you need to be eating. You're going to feel very depleted if you're not. And that can negatively affect your milk supply. So we are eating when the baby's eating. We're eating every 2 to 4 hours. And yes, that includes overnight. So especially the first 12 weeks postpartum when you're more likely to not sleep through the night. No fasted training. No fasted training. Absolutely no fasted training. I don't recommend this for any athlete, especially a breastfeeding athlete. Electrolytes, at least in like one of your cups throughout the day, probably more than one though. You're having electrolytes, you're salting your food, you're looking for potassium rich foods. Again, we talk about all of that in the course. So if you need more examples, but make sure you're including electrolytes, and it's probably more than you think. Be more liberal with your intra run fuel and hydration. So when you are training again, if you were someone where you were like, I never like took anything with me unless it was over an hour, or if you're not taking my advice thus far, if it was longer than that, which if you are taking my advice, you should always bring hydration and fuel with you if you're running over an hour. But Breastfeeding, in my opinion, if it's over 30 minutes, bring water with you. If you want to bring it under 30 minutes, great. But bring water, preferably like electrolyte water or sports drink with you, and bring a gel, bring gummies, bring something. Because again, we want to be repleting while we're depleting when it comes to breastfeeding because your energy needs are so high, your nutrient needs are so high, and it's going to be really hard to meet them by accident. So if you're going to add more energy depletion, like running on top of that, just bring fuel and hydration with you on shorter stuff and get really good at that. Have some sort of milk at meals. I already talked about this. And continue your prenatal vitamin postpartum and an omega-3. Holly, what prenatal should I take? I have no idea. I need your lab work. I need you to review everything in my pregnancy course and masterclass on breastfeeding because I talk about the ones I recommend there, why I recommend them, who I recommend them for, depending on different blood work levels, because no prenatal is the same. There's some really bad ones out there. And there's a lot of strategy that goes into this, but know that if you are postpartum, I recommend you continue your prenatal through the 4th trimester, so through 12 weeks postpartum. If you're breastfeeding, I recommend you continue that prenatal through your breastfeeding journey, or 12 weeks, whatever comes last, basically. So you want to continue that. I also recommend most women take an omega-3 supplement postpartum. DHA is really important for your baby. Some women are great about eating sources of DHA, which is mostly through salmon and seafood. And most women, I find, are not good about that. So taking an omega-3 supplement can help reduce inflammation. It can help promote healthy lipid levels. And it can also basically ensure that you are getting DHA to your own brain and your baby. Because again, your baby's going to take the DHA, but they're going to take it from your brain. So you want to make sure you're covering your bases there. Use whole fat products. So dairy products, get the whole fat version. Whole fat peanut butter, whole fat almond butter, no low fat anything. You need that fat. You need those energy needs, and it's going to help you absorb fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. Add stuff to smoothies. Caloric liquids can be really helpful, especially because you can sip them and hydrate and replete nutrition while you're breastfeeding. That's definitely very helpful. So those are my biggest tips on how to make that happen, kind of the elevator speech podcast version. And then lab work wise, around 6 to 12 weeks postpartum, and then 6 months after that, and then every 3 to 6 months after that is typically when I recommend getting blood work done. And you can go back to the blood work episode to talk, to hear me talk about what blood work I recommend getting done. And no, your doctors probably aren't going to do any of this blood work unless you ask. So you're going to have to do it yourself. You can work with me and I can help you with that. I can order it for certain clients as well. So reach out to me if you need help with that. Supplement accordingly. That's why you're getting the blood work. So you understand where your weak spots are and how to tweak things. Because again, breastfeeding, your milk supply is going to change as baby gets older. And a lot of the times your micronutrient statuses can also change. So that's definitely important. Again, whenever your cycle does come back, if your cycle comes back when you're breastfeeding, know that because of sex hormone changes and fluctuations throughout the menstrual cycle, this can affect milk supply. So like I said, prolactin, when prolactin's increased, typically sex hormones are decreased. When your cycle's coming back in the luteal phase, which is the 2 weeks before your period starts, usually, progesterone and estrogen naturally increase, which sometimes can make prolactin decrease a little bit, and you'll notice a little change in your milk supply. This definitely happened to me. I noticed for like a week or two leading up to my period, my milk supply would like reduce by like, sometimes it was like a lot, like it was over 50% reduction, and I would freak out. Know that it usually comes back when your hormones level out after you get your period, because then prolactin's able to rise. Know that eating enough can support this, and there is some research to support a calcium magnesium supplement in the dose of about 1,000 milligrams of calcium in the luteal phase can help basically combat that milk supply discrepancy. And that is something I took directly from La Leche League, which is a really great resource and website that lactation consultants have built that contains a ton of research on breastfeeding nutrition. There's also what's the other one? LactMed database is another really great resource on medications and supplements that interact with breastfeeding and are or are not supported, and all of the research and what's recommended. LactMed, I'll link that in the show notes too. It's a really great resource. I did this personally. I didn't notice a huge difference. And if it helped me or not, maybe it did because I was able to breastfeed for a long time while I got my period. But um, that is something that is supported by research. So you can always try that out if you're nervous about supply. Once your period comes back and you kind of notice that discrepancy, but just know that some fluctuation is normal. All right. I talked at you for a really long time about this, but I hope your takeaways are understanding like why stress fractures are a big risk with runners, how we can nutritionally support and approach that, what micronutrients and macronutrients change during breastfeeding, and a lot of context as to why. If you are needing more resources and you want more information and more support with this, there's a couple options. So you can take my pregnancy nutrition athlete course, that's linked in the show notes. The breastfeeding fourth trimester class is included in that. You can also just buy the breastfeeding athlete nutrition masterclass. There's a lot of information there too on just the fourth trimester, even if you're not breastfeeding. So that can be a really great resource. Um, and you can also book an appointment with us. Both myself and my team sports dietitian, Erica, are moms who breastfed their kids, who have worked with other moms who breastfed their kids, who have a lot of education in this and find it very interesting and seek out a lot of extra education on top of what we already know. And we would love to help you. Erica's also great and board certified in diabetes and is really great on working with moms who have gestational diabetes, especially if you need to take insulin. So if you have that experience too, she's a great resource. So check that out too. I'll link booking with us in the show notes. But I hope this was helpful. You're doing a great job if you're out there feeding your baby in any way. And I know how hard this can be, but you're doing a great job. So just feed yourself and keep on keeping on. But I'll see you guys in the next one.